Bum, bum, ba-dee-um, dum, 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 da-dee, da-da-dum. Well, hello, whoever, wherever, whenever you are. Welcome. Penny Smatto here, going live to talk about the tyranny of the Quilters Guilds, of the Quilters Guild concept. There's two, well, there's beginning to be other branches as well, some of which I prefer to ignore. But the mausoleum of quilting is the quilt show. I mean, we've all noticed for a few years now that these companies that sell these giant, now computerized, and they can do everything and fix you a cup of coffee while they do your quilt for you, and then you can put it in the show and get an award. They're called the long arms. And everyone, it's all these middle class women who can have, and they cost, few thousand, more than a few $1,000s, I think. I don't know exactly what they're going for now, but first of all, you have to have the real estate for them. You have to have a home where you can have a large, very large, I mean, you're talking king size quilt. Hi, Frostrong. You're talking king size quilt. So that's probably 5 feet wide. So you've got to have a room in which you can set that up, and it's basically a piece of furniture. And the electricity's got to be pretty bad. Hi there, Lisa. Thank you for saying hello. So I can't. It's a powerful machine. So you're paying an electric bill. You're paying every time you get yourself a new computerized design. You're paying for that. And we've all been watching these so-called quilts get prizes at these so-called shows, quilt shows, that are so heavily designed and quilted. They're not intended ever to be on a bed. They're wall hangings. They're not on the bed. And now we've got endless. I mean, I realize the analog sends us videos in groups, and you got to check the timing. It might appear that all of a sudden everyone's doing something, but when you start looking, some of these videos are 5 or 6 years old, and the analog has just decided to send them to you. So the analog's been doing that with bed turnings. Every single bed turning has the same Quilt Guild ladies reading the same exact speech about how back in the day women used to do this. And of course, they all have to be patronizing the feminist, woman-hating propaganda that it's always way back then. Life was so hard. Those poor women worked so hard to get little scraps of fabric because they didn't have nothing. And, and once or twice you hear that, it's like, yeah. And it's true. Life in some ways was hard. In a lot of ways, though, it's a lot harder today. You didn't end up with the problems on your doorstep back then that you have today. But on top of it, you look at the prices that these businesses, these corporations like Missouri Star and these other big businesses are charging for acrylic templates. Now, the fact is, if you have other tools, maybe a husband with a very well-equipped workshop, you can buy sheets of acrylic and use a computer to put in some measurements and come up with a plastic template to fit a design. And now I see quilter after quilter putting up videos about how she has to buy all these templates because she wants to make this quilt. So, and you have to have the pattern. The pattern's $20 each template. And these templates are like, if I want to make a piece the shape of this cell phone, I'm going to have to go buy a quilt shop $20 cell phone shaped template. You know, I mean, think you can use the cell phone and trace that. You can use a 50-cent school 12-inch ruler and a piece of cardboard cut from a cereal box and trace out a triangle. Duh. I mean, seriously. You buy a book, like it's $15, $16. I mean, I think I went to half price books and for about $8 or $9 I got a book with 100 quilt patterns in it. These are traditional, open source, not copyrighted. In each pattern, there's a page with a sketched out template. You just take a piece of wax paper, lay it over the page, trace that template, and then take it over and trace it onto cardboard, freezer paper, whatever you want to use. All my life. I mean, I didn't make quilts all my life. When I started making quilts about 30 years ago, 40 years ago, and I haven't been making quilt for 40 years. For many, many years I didn't bother. But I did, my first quilt that I made was when my daughter was about 10 years old. And I just simply thought about it and started cutting diamond shapes out of, just sketched a diamond and then started making a tumbling blocks hexagon quilt, which has 3 diamonds to make a hexagon. If you've done 3rd grade geometry, learned how to use a ruler and a pencil on a piece of paper, and the teacher explained to you what a triangle is, what a 6-sided figure, a hexagon is, what a square is, what a rectangle is, learned how to use a compass to draw a circle, which you don't even need because you can use a bottle cap or a jar cap. These people are spending over $100 on stuff, and then they're having nervous breakdowns over putting quilts in shows that after they bought all this stuff that they don't need, they go and if they don't have the money to have a long arm in their house, I don't know how much you pay somebody to long arm it, but it ain't cheap. I'm sure it's not cheap. So most of these women in these quilt guild things, they've spent about $100 at least, just fooling around. I mean, we're not even talking about the cost of the fabric. And cotton is cotton. I'm sorry, girls, but cotton is cotton is cotton. The fact that I mean, I used to wonder why people were in a panic over Joann's shutting down. Joann's was the most overpriced scam store out there. They would jack the prices up to twice of what other people had to spend, of what others were selling for. Then they would knock a discount down. So you'd get a coupon to get the fabric at the regular price against their other price. And then they had restrictions on the coupon. You could only buy one piece of fabric. You couldn't use the coupon, or, even if you went in with 2 copies of the coupon, you couldn't buy 2 pieces of fabric. You had, whatever. All kinds of restrictions. But nobody could seem to, and when Joann's went out of business, I said, well, if I had as much money as half of these women have, first thing I'd have done was go buy cloth, and you don't have to buy it from Joann's. Joann's gets their fabrics from big companies that make fabric. You call up a fabric factory, and you say, hey, do you make cotton? They say, yes, we do. How much of an order do I have to get some wholesale? They might say, well, you got to show us your business registry so that we don't have to charge sales tax, and we like to see an order of, $1,000 or something, for a big business. A couple ladies could easily get together and buy a bunch of cotton cloth and let all the quilters around town know that we have cloth if you want to come look at it and buy it, and we'll sell it to you by the yard at the regular retail price that you would have paid if Joann's stayed open. These brilliant women, all well-educated, highfalutin, middle-class women, and a lot of them church ladies, are too stupid to figure out how to set up their own simple cloth selling business. No, they're not stupid. They know how to do it. But you know the first thing that would happen to any one of them who tried? The Quilt Guild police would be down on them like that. I was having a little talk with a neighbor of mine, the neighbor who gave me the Our Lady of Guadalupe when I first moved down here. It was funny. She said to me, put that near the window to protect you. I found out she's right. But I said, isn't it strange? Because we were watching at that point, the street hadn't really been cleaned up yet. There was quite a campaign that in fact cost us a police chief. He went from being chief of police, they kicked him upstairs to City Hall. And then he sat down with me and a few other neighbors about the fact that the police were being told by City Hall not to make arrests. And the drug trafficking was close to an elementary school down the road from where I was living at the time. It wasn't this particular building. There was an elementary school down the road. There was a known sex offender that was on the constable's list because the constable used to come by that part of the street every Halloween and every holiday to make sure that guy was honored. They have rules about registered sex offenders. They can't put up Halloween decorations or try to bring kids to the door or do anything. But they allowed him to live across the street from an elementary school, and we had the police down there and tried to point out he had cameras pointed at the school. So we had a meeting. Now that police chief that had been kicked up and promoted upstairs to where he wasn't dealing with it. But he still found a way to deal with us because now he was in the administration, so we were able to meet with him. And he said he was going to have somebody look into it, and I know the name of the other police officer that was assigned to investigate. And the mayor's office told us we had to talk to the community relations, which we thought was another City Hall local agency. No, it wasn't. It was a federal agency. And they were running the protection racket for the pedophiles and the drug trade. But the story didn't end there. We ended up with the FBI coming in. And 2.5, yeah, somebody says a long arm is 2.5 cents a square inch. Well, how do you get a square inch out of a seam? Because a seam is a line. So I guess I don't want to argue the details, but if you add up how many inches in all the sewing on a king size quilt, which would be 100, and I would say a king size might be 108, let's say 100 inches by 100 inches just to do round numbers. So if you've got a long armor, I have no idea, Foster Dog, because I don't use long armors. I'm just going on about the authority lines. I'll get back to why that little sidelight off into the police chief comes into this, because it does. But the long arm thing, let's take a break and do some math. Let's say I have a 100-inch by 100-inch quilt. And I want a long armor to do just a simple crisscross quilting on it. 2 inches, let's say the lines are going to be 2 inches apart. So that would be 50 times 100 inches one way. 50 times 100 inches the other way. So let's say it's 100 times 100 inches. What's 100 times 100? 10 times 100 is 1,000. 100 times 100 is 10,000. 10,000 inches times 2.5 cents. 30,000 cents. Okay, 30,000 cents. Does that come out to $300? Seriously? I don't know. But tell me, Lisa, if it's 2.5 inch a square inch, can you just give a ballpark figure of what you'd pay for a queen size quilt? Because I'm coming up with $300, and I could probably have totally messed up the math. Oh, we got a hi from Medellin, Colombia. Say hi to Ollie North for me too. Anyway, why did the police chief story figure into the quilt story? Now we're going to get to it. Among the neighbors who went to the city hall that time, and we got somebody tapping in from Central Correction Facility. Well, stay out of trouble. Behave yourself. See if you can get out on good behavior, whoever you are. I don't mind a little teasing and trolling as long as you guys keep it clean and not too mean. So one of was this lady that had given me that tapestry to. Well, we were talking about how they were so up in arms about us trying to put a stop. The open drug trade, what was going on, besides the fact that they had the camera pointed at the elementary school, the whores, well, they had a system going where there was a crack house across the road. So you had, if you could picture it, the house I lived in was on the street corner. There was like a whole cluster of little apartments, low-income house. They weren't government, but they were just a poor, trashy slum neighborhood there. And then you could look down the road and you could see the elementary school. And my house was a duplex. And the sex offender was living in the other half of the duplex. That's why we knew about the cameras. And they were mad because me and a few other people who lived on the street kept trying to get the police to clean it up. And what would happen is the prostitutes and the pimps who lived in the crack house group of slum apartments, what they would do is they would use our patio and sit in our front yard when they had to meet a John. So they would get on the phone to someone, oh yeah, I'll meet you, and they'd come down the street corner. They'd sit on my doorstep. So anybody on the neighborhood watch, which is where we get the Quilt Guild ladies, right? They're always in your your fascist homeowners organization and association, all that crap. They're the ones who drive by and say, hey, that house has got prostitution going on. Look, there's them two sitting out there. We couldn't even kick them off for trespassing because the cops would always give us an argument. So we went to City Hall and said, do something about your police department. They're refusing to do their job. And of course we found out that, well, they were doing their job because they were doing it according to what City Hall was telling them to do. And so here I am in this conversation with my neighbor, and we said, we're getting all this pushback because we're trying to stop the drug sales and the sex sales and actually the child trafficking stuff, because they had some young teenagers, and that guy was, he had his camera pointed at the elementary school. And we're trying to get them to stop being able to do this, and nobody wants to arrest them. But I said, darn well, if I hung a quilt out on the porch, City Hall would be here in a moment, telling the landlord, put a stop to that. That's a business. You can't do that here. And the church ladies and the Quilt Guild ladies, they'd be all over it. So that's why I'm talking about the Quilt Guild tyranny, because these people who run these quilt shows, they are responsible for making sure that working class people don't get, unless of course you get a few fine white college educated, highly degreed quilt ladies who belong to a guild to set up something like the Quilters of Gee's Bend, Alabama, and turn them into a dog and pony show about their heritage. But any regular, normal, working class black woman who tries to start selling quilts is going to be all over the place getting citations and everything else from the local Chamber of Commerce and everybody else if she doesn't toe the line with the politics and propaganda of the Quilt Guild tyranny. It's one scam after another. And they've got people so dumbed down. I'm going to go over the chat in a minute. I don't see anything that needs blocking, so thank you for playing nice, everybody. What was I saying? Yeah, I mean, I know it's you're less trouble. You get less trouble if you go out and sell illegal drugs on the street than if you try to just sell a few quilts or anything else. And it is the upper middle class tyranny. It is tyranny. And it's stupid. We're so dumbed down. Like I said, my grandmother, okay, we're looking at a woman whose Victorian age crazy quilt was actually done in the Victorian age that I had on my bed as a small child. My grandmother died of old age when I was 6 months old, and I'm pretty old now myself. How old would she? I bet she'd be pushing 200 years old if she was still alive. Anyway, the way she made her living was she had a car. She had one of the original Ford Model A's or Model T's, and she picked up yards of cloth that were leftovers at the end of the runs at the print shop, the factories that were printing the cotton. And she would take those end runs, pile them in the back of the car, and drive up and down the country roads, selling them to the farm women who made the clothes for their kids. So, yeah, but you couldn't do that today. You couldn't do it today. You would be up against so many rules and laws and code enforcements. You'd knock on a door, and the next thing you know, somebody's called the cops to say there's a suspicious person knocking on doors. But if you were selling your booty and meeting your John on that same person's picnic table in their yard, they wouldn't be able to call the cops on you. You know, think it through. Why are we so dumb that these fine college-educated... What really set me off, okay, you want to know what really set this rant off? They're now putting quilt shows up that look like art gallery museum stuff with all kinds, and making sure that these quilts are useless. You cannot put these quilts on a bed. And the ones that are like the real quilts look, well, they're in the Historical Society, and they have to be presented with the pity party, we're so much better off attitude, and the snotty attitude that they have. Okay, I ranted enough. Let me read the chat. Let's see. Quilts on steroids. Long armor charges 2.5 cents a square inch. Hi from Medellin, Colombia. Somebody come saying he's tapped from the Central Correction Facility, wherever that is. Somebody else wants me to know he's not a Christian. I don't care. Everyone's got to be something. Anthony Reed's got a question. Leather jacket wants to downsize. Take it to a seamstress or a leather guy? Anthony, I would say take it to a seamstress who's experienced with leather. Because you got two different things going on there. Someone else says, someone with a Chinese name says Trump or Harris. I hope you're a bot. Because that's just plain stupid. Then I got a green, white, and red flag. I'm not quite sure whose flag it is. Foster Dog says it's a front. A lot of those quilt guilds, especially at the show level, where talentless people with computer-generated designs can win, right? I wouldn't say it's a front. I would say it's a racket. It's just one of those things that our whole society is choked with plastic racket. Spartacus says we need a freedom revolution. Yeah. Escobar tells me I'm amazing. He must be a buddy of the guy from Medellin, huh? Maybe he's still in the corrections facility himself. Boomer Activities, LMAO. Yep. Queen size, okay. Queen size quilt's $135. Now we're only talking about putting the seams on. She's already had to pay for a queen size batting, and to get good quality batting, you're looking at, I don't know, for a queen size, if it's not polyester, which you don't want polyester, believe me, that's junk. So if you got a good quality cotton batting, I think you're looking at $60 there. You're looking at another 60 for a good quality large piece of cloth cotton for the backing. There's 120. And then depending on all the piecework, you're looking at another $100 for the fabric in the front. Brand new cotton fabric. So we're looking at $600. And the thing's not even finished yet. I mean, I might be exaggerating a little bit. Number one, I don't do queen size, so I'm playing with numbers that are bigger than I'm used to. And number two, I mostly don't do any new, I sometimes buy new cotton by the yard, but I buy regular cotton and not the fancy stuff. So I spend about $6 or $7 a yard. I do twin size quilts, so I only use about 3 or 4 yards per quilt for the top. And then I'll buy, if I buy a king size sheet for $20, I'll get 2 twin sizes out of it, cotton sheet. And I use blankets. I buy blankets for $10 or $20. So I might spend $50 or $60, and then I'll sell the quilt for about $100. But I can't just go out and sell the quilt. I have to take it to a quilt show, and it won't be my utilitarian fly by the seat of your pants style of design. Won't get into the show unless I want to do some kind of sob story about hardship and ethnic heritage, and like, no, this is what quilts are supposed to be. I mean, yes, people did buy whole fabric for a quilt back in the day, just like they do today. They went and bought certain designs they wanted to put in a quilt, and they figured it all out. But they also used, cut up shirts and dresses and leftovers from other projects. And I'm not complaining about the money. It's the attitude that is, we've got the alphabet soup people dominating stuff. So, you got to look over your shoulder. And it's frustrating. It makes me angry. But I think it was that art gallery show, one of the channels. I recognize the type. New York School of Design, and now you're not even going to be able to get into a quilt show unless you've got the seal of approval from some New York college art major who wouldn't be able to make a quilt themselves, but they will be making the rules. So, anyway, let's see. Back into the chat. Seamstress or leather guy. Freedom Revolution. Yeah, so she's saying my math was not too far off at 300. Somebody wants to know how many quaaludes I was doing in the 70s. No, I was working and just being a normal, hardworking, regular person. Didn't do anything stronger than, a beer. Gracias, señora. De nada, de nada. Oh, she did a queen size, and she bought the batting, and it came out at $250. Why are there no pharmacies in Africa? because you can't take medicine on an empty stomach. That's from my friend Ishan, who's got a Obama-style avatar. We recognize the Obama propaganda, buddy. Why are the stomachs in Africa empty? Because you believe in people like Obama. That's my opinion. Okay, that's my political rant for today. Okay, the guy from Medellin says he's been in Colombia for 8 years. God bless you. My friend Ishan is laughing. Now, he's not laughing at what I just said because that was up there already. He's laughing at something else. They would rob the pharmacies out like Walmart. now this is what we're down to. Plasma Zombie is saying you would have crime in Africa. It's almost as bad as Walmart in the United States. That's where we're at now, huh? That's true. Native of Western North Carolina. Okay, now we're down in Colombia. Okay, let's see. I'm sorry, my screen is freezing. There. How much wood can? Okay. Oops. Oh. Yeah, quilting comes from the Appalachian Mountains has a lot of quilt tradition. Where was I in 1998? Actually, I was someplace interesting. I won't say here. That's when I decided I couldn't put up with the crap in Massachusetts anymore, and the cults were really taking over, and that's when I moved. That's when I made the move to Texas, because I moved here in 1998, had a job here, and the deal I had made with someone was I would come down and work for a while, and if I liked it, I would stay, and if I didn't, I would leave, and I liked it, so I stayed. I got my own apartment, got another job, and stayed. Grandma is me. What do I think about Donald Trump? Well, he's probably the most entertaining president we've ever had. And he keeps people on the edge of their seats. And I love the idea of FAFO. In fact, you know, YouTube lets you put in your pronouns. I wanted to put FAFO in as my pronouns, and they wouldn't let me. They have a list. You have to pick from a list that they give you. So I said, oh, screw it. I just leave me no pronouns. Okay. Anthony wants to know if I'm from I was born and raised in Massachusetts. All my people are such bad Yankees that they thought I left for another planet when I moved to Texas, and they were right. Was I part of a cult? Actually, I grew up in a very sheltered, like, back in the Middle Ages level of a Catholic traditional community. So, and I didn't know that was considered a cult because I grew up in it. Then I joined the left-wing Bolshevik cult called the Democrat Party, and I left that. And there was a group running a food pantry that I was actually part of because I was volunteering at the food pantry, and that was the political cult that now runs the Democrat Party. It's called NATLFed, National Labor Federation, and yeah, so I can't, I wish you guys would have names we can pronounce. This guy's name is Wolf 114. Okay. Nashi Bear wants to say hello from Australia. Good day, mate. Jerry is looking like two girls telling me I'm so pretty. Must be a bot. Okay. Well, I'm trying to. It's a flirt bot. How do you feel? Rodney says, how do you feel about racial demographics changing in America? And if so, is there a way to stop it? Well, that if so kind of indicates that you've already answered the question for me, but I really don't care, because if you're talking about race, that doesn't, I wasn't raised among Anglo whites. In fact, my people are actually not considered white. I look white because my mother's Irish. There was a time when the Irish, and it's still here today, the Irish aren't considered white either because we're not Protestant. But the demographic changes are not due to race. They're due to immigration of and falsely based immigration. People have been told they've got jobs waiting for them that are not here. They've been lied to, brought into this country in order to build a criminal underclass, and it has nothing at all to do with what color their skin is. It's actually a military invasion where they're using civilians, innocent civilians. The same Democrat Party that has been running down these countries is now telling them, oh, go to America, they take care of you. Here. They even found some of them giving them directions how to make it across the Rio Grande without either drowning or getting arrested. And where to go once you get here. Where's making it look like the Underground Railroad of the Civil War days. And actually, they're bringing them in for slavery, because this is a slave trading operation, this immigration thing. So the question about racial demographics, the demographics are changed, but the real serious problem we have is worldwide. And so immigration isn't going to solve the fact that the demographics are heading very rapidly up to the point where people my age are going to be the majority, and there aren't going to be enough younger people to keep things going, just in numbers alone. And this is going all over the world, so you're not going to be able to continuously bring immigrants in with lots of kids, because they're going through the same problem. And the other part is we have not educated. We got a younger generation today that can't read. There are college kids being allowed to go into college because somebody's paying the bill. As long as they get a check in the college, they don't care. They let them in, and they can't even read a full book. Okay. I'm still not. All right, we're getting a lot of nasties in here, and I'm not quite able. All right, we've got some stuff in here that I'm trying to get rid of. Let's see. Let me see. I've got to. Let's see. Yeah, I don't like flirt bots. Okay. Used to live in West Warwick, Rhode Island with the military. Is that down near Newport? Newport Beach? I used to go fishing off Judith. Is it Judith Point? Salisbury Beach, where they had the sand on Salisbury Beach in Rhode Island, the ocean beach, is pink because it has so much rose quartz in it. It's actually pink. Do I know about Jeffrey Epstein? Who doesn't know about that jerk? Rodney wants to know why I left the Democrat Party. Was there something you didn't like that you seen? I don't really feel like doing a 10-hour live stream, and Rodney. But the Democrat Party is not what it used to be, or what we once thought it was. Lenji wants to know who got arrested. Lenji, I got to remove the F word because I don't want my channel getting hit for nasty language. And unfortunately, my screen is freezing again. Well, I would appreciate if y'all would use little asterisks and things instead of cuss words, because the algorithm will be nasty to me for having cuss words. Yes, foster dog, if you can get rid, don't time them out, just remove the remark that Lenji made about 3 things above where he's using the F word. If you see someone use the F word, please just remove that one remark, and if they keep going in a nasty direction, time them out. But, I mean, if someone just came out of a chat room where there's a lot of cussing going on, they might just be in the habit and not realize that we don't want that going on. Anyway, it's okay, Lenji. You seem like a good person. I cuss sometimes myself. I try not to. But, yeah, the whole thing I was talking about, though, about quilts, it's like the control of our culture is so solid that as soon as any natural part of our way of life begins to get some strength, because quilting, it's a hugely important part of survival of mental health. It does preserve our heritage in many interesting ways. It's very basic. And it's also an industry that has always been, even back to the Stone Age, textile production has been as important to the human race, coming from women, as hunting, survival, coming from men. It's basic. And now we've got the same idiots that are trying to stop girls from being able to have girls' sports by putting men in dresses in there. They're doing the same thing to all of the needle arts, the sewing arts, the knitting and crocheting and weaving arts. I know. Yes, weaving. Men in some countries, men were the weavers. I mean, that was something interesting. In England, men, I think in certain parts, like Wales and Scotland and places, men were the weavers, but then in other parts of England, women were the weavers. And in most of the world, women were the weavers. And if you know, and I know a lot about ethnic textile history, because those are my people. The textile mills of New England is my heritage. And yeah, Tennessee, that's a big textile area. But up north in New England, Lowell, Massachusetts was the big weaving, because the textile tied up with the Civil War, which was not about slavery, because the people today are still enslaved. They simply expanded it beyond black. And actually, it had been expanded before. It was like anybody who fell on hard times, if you ended up owing money in England, you could be thrown into slavery called indentured servant. That means you have no choice. You're going to serve this person because you owe him too much money. That's slavery. Prisoners of war, no fault of your own. Highfalutin kings and whatevers go to war. They raid your village. You were put on the auction block as slaves. My people, the Cajun people, were put on auction blocks alongside the black African slaves who were brought here from Africa. And the only reason we begin to identify American slavery with black people is that the textile industry used to be cottage people in their homes making enough to sell a few yards to a business downtown, and then the rest for the family. And so you had all these cottage people doing their stuff. But then in the early 1800s, there was an invention called the cotton gin, which was a machine that could take the seeds out of cotton very rapidly. And before that, you might have a few people who were slaves, but they were like 2 or 3 people. And you only had a little bit of farmland because it was so much work to just remove the seeds. You couldn't make enough cotton fast enough to make any money to pay for all that slavery. But when they brought in the machines, suddenly they said, hey, we can grow acres and acres of cotton. And then they say, oh, wait a minute, we got all this cotton. Now we need 100 helpers instead of 2 or 3. And when families used to own 2 or 3 people as slaves, they were like part of the family. They weren't treated the way plantation slaves were treated. So then it became black because the Native Americans, you could slave them for about an hour and a half before they laughed at you and went off back into the woods to join their tribe. Same thing with the Cajuns. Same thing with any other group that knew what was going on in this country. But you pull someone here from the jungles of Africa, they not only are now in a place where they have no clue what's going on, different animals in the woods, they can't go out and eat. They can't eat the wild foods because they don't know what they are because they're in a different country. They could eat wild foods if they were still in Africa, but they can't do it here. And they can't blend in with any local tribes because they're obviously foreign. And they could handle the heat, which a lot of other people, if they grabbed slaves from up in England and Ireland, they used the Irish as slaves, but they couldn't handle the heat. So all these things come together, and the reason we had black slavery was more to do with a combination of convenience and automation. And the Civil War was also the first time they had a chance to play with their new toy called the railroad system. And the fact that the Union Army could go from one place to another by railroad, while the Confederate Army had to get on their horses and ride from place to place. That's why we won the Civil War. And Rodney is saying Democrat Party was taken by socialist Marxism. You're right about socialism and Marxism. They are actually full-on members of the actual. They're run by a group, the Progressive Party USA. Google it. Google Progressive with a capital P, Party with a capital P, comma, USA. It's a real group. That group took control of the Democrat Party in the 1990s. That group is Natalfed, N-A-T. The way it's done is capital N-A-T, capital L, capital F-E-D. That's the secret police Gestapo that is running death squads against dissidents. No matter who you are or why you're rebelling, as soon as you look like you could have an effect, they have a couple of people supported entirely by a certain American, Foster Dog's got it printed out there. Foster Dog, if you can grab some links and throw them in the chat, that would be great. Thank you for subscribing. Everyone else here, please subscribe because I'm trying to get to 500. Eli Whitney, that's the guy who invented that. Old Man Foster Dog, the history of textiles in New England. My favorite uncle, God rest him, he was the head of Local 259, Cranston Printwork, United Textile Workers. My grandmother, as I was saying, she used to sell cloth. My aunts were weavers. And I worked in the same factory where my aunts were weavers. When my daughter was little and I moved back home because I was single parenting and, divorcing her dad and all that. And I went into the same factory just for the thrill of it. I went into the same exact building that my aunts had worked in when my grandmother was selling cloth. Rodney Wilson, Rodney, you're mixing up globalization today and history. The African slave trade it existed for thousands of years. Egypt was built on slavery, and I'm not talking about the Jews. Egypt, every single human society, when it becomes urban, the temple societies like Egypt and the pharaohs, or over in South America, you had the Incas and the Aztec, the sacrificial death squad societies. They were all based on a group of people getting control of the flow of water. Because these were all in the desert kingdoms, like along the Nile, they could control the rivers. In places like the Amazon, you have too much water, but you could build up these mounds in which became South American pyramids, and you could control where people could live on land because you could control, so it had to do with that sort of thing. Every single nationality has either held slaves or been slaves at one time or another. And really, it's about technology, the technology of slavery. Like what I'm talking about. Who would think that you could have so much control that at this point, any group of women that decided they were going to do some neighborhood type of fabric business selling quilts, flea market style, would very quickly face problems, not because of doing things out in the open, but because all of our communications are being monitored. And every single group has somebody who is what we call a Karen. The Karens are the KGB police of the society today. It's crazy. And it's all because the technology allows it. Okay, trying to unfreeze the screen again. Yeah, Muslims sold Africans. But the Muslims and the Jews together did that because the Jews were running the business of the shipping businesses. They were running the insurance. If you look, there's a movie, I was watching a TV series out of the UK that was all about the history of the slave trade, and it's a drama. It was following the life of a young woman in the age of the sailboats and the clipper ships, and she married. Her family was like, they were trying to be middle class, but they were struggling, and they were trying to marry up. So she marries this guy who's considered to be a really great businessman, and only after the wedding does she find out that his business is running slaves that are being brought in by the not African people, but the ships that come from Africa would go to England. That's where the captain, and he owned a few of these ships. So he had these captains who would be delivering freshly caught slaves. Now, what he had to do was keep those slaves in some kind of warehouse-style captivity while he's told his wife it's her job now to train them so that they can now once they learn a little bit of English and they learn how to behave they could then be sold to the English nobility to be house servants, or even sent across the Atlantic to the United States. And she suddenly discovers that she's responsible for this. She has to do this. And of course, the drama, the soap opera kicks in where, she starts to feel sorry for the people, and her husband's trying to tell her it's just a business. They're no different than cattle. And the Jews still call us all cattle. The Jews are still running the slave trade. They've got everybody blaming. They got everybody blaming everybody else. But they've been at the bottom and top of it. The Muslims, something people don't really think about. Islam is the youngest of the three, what they call the people of the book: Jews, Christians, and Muslims. The eldest are the Jews, who had already abandoned the Bible before Jesus even showed up. One of the reasons why he was crucified, why they got so angry at him, was he was looking at atheists. The temple, the Pharisees were atheists. And they were materialists. They were just like the Marxist Bolsheviks of today. That's who they were. And Jesus was a country boy. He came out of Galilee, where they weren't ashamed to be the son of a carpenter. The son of a carpenter could go into the synagogue and read from the same scrolls of the most learned men in Jerusalem. His family spent time in in Egypt. When the word went out that Herod was going to kill off as many babies as he could because he was afraid of this prophecy that someone was going to take his throne, a new king would be born, and he thought it meant a political king. We all know the story at Christmas, how the three kings warned the family, and then they pack up and take off. The reason Mary and Joseph grabbed baby Jesus and ran to Egypt was Galilee already had a village in Egypt. It's just like running back and forth between Mexico and Texas. That was already half their land. Most of the Christianity that we get from Jesus, a lot of it came from the fact that he was learning and growing up among the Coptic people, the Galilean Egyptian community, the expatriates who lived in Egypt. And then it's well accepted in many circles that as a young man, as a teenager and in his 20s, he traveled with the caravans and stuff into into India, and learned Eastern mysticism. And then when he came back, and at age 30, he stood up in the synagogue in Galilee and announced that he was there to fulfill prophecy, because he had an awareness of, he had enough education and upbringing. And what he did was he went into Jerusalem and he started challenging the Bolsheviks, the atheists, the Marxists of his time, the propaganda bureaucrat Pharisees. And who are the first ones the Pharisees run to when they realize they got a problem here? Do they get on their knees and ask God to strike Jesus down for what he said, even when he blasphemed according to them? No, they ran to Rome. They ran to Pontius Pilate. That was their master, the guy with the money, because that's what they worship. That's what they still worship today. The Jews they threw the Old Testament out, even back then, and they still throw it out. They've got this Talmud and all this other stuff. The whole Epstein thing, somebody was saying in chat, what did I think of Epstein? I was looking at some videos coming across the screen today about exactly what these emails amongst the American Jewish community, which is responsible for most of the violence we have going on. And one of the things that's terrifying a lot of the American Jewish community today is that the American black community has started to figure it out. And they're not playing the game the way the Mossadian cult wants them to. Now, let me go back in. So, now this is another thing, the big lie about Muslims. These fake Christians, Baptists, and these others, you go to any church now calling itself non-denominational. It's a Baptist church. It's not non-denominational. It's Baptist. And the Baptists go by something other than Jesus. And they have, look, right up there where the preacher preaches, in an American church here in Texas or anywhere else in this country, you will see the flag of Israel off to one side alongside the flag of the United States. The president's son-in-law, Kushner, holds Israeli citizenship. I believe the president himself at this point probably does. I don't think Donald Trump is 100% aware of what he's allowing, but he's a New Yorker who grew up in the Dale Carnegie prosperity Christian tradition, which is indistinguishable from the Reformed Jewish culture. I pray that he's enough of a realist, because he looks at what's going on, and he will allow himself to get drug into things if it looks like it's going to get him the support he wants. That's how he plays the game. But then he does whatever he wants. But as he's getting so much older now, I don't know how assertive he is. I think unfortunately Israel has a tight grip. But Israel may have a tight grip on Trump. But the people who think that because we support Trump, that we worship him, no. That's not, just like Jesus' own followers. The Pharisees couldn't figure it out. Jesus' disciples were powerful, not because they worshipped Jesus. In fact, you can read the Bible, even right up to the Last Supper, they were still arguing about who he really was. But what he was doing was putting them in touch with their own heritage, which is not the stuff that Jews claim it was. And the whole thing about the Muslims, let me go back to what I was saying. I got to get the chat back up here. God, I wish YouTube would fix this. They have the worst chat system. So Jews call us goy, cattle. Muslims call us servants of Allah. Even though, okay, well, you know, I'm not going to try to pick through how much historical propaganda is calling Muhammad the P word. Partly because right now in America, they're calling men who want to date a 19-year-old woman a pedo. And in the time of Muhammad, the British royalty had child brides. So did the German, French, and every other European royalty. They had child brides. So you're looking at the culture, what's going on. Number one, we're looking at things through distorted lenses. Number two, we don't know how much of what's said is true. And I'm not going to try to figure it out because it's not my problem. Most pastors don't know the history. Okay, English translated Bible. That's what I wanted to get at. The word Allah means God. If you are a Christian, born again, total, the whole thing, and you are from an Arab country, and you speak the Aramaic language, the language of Jesus himself, so you want to go talk to your family about your faith in Jesus as a Christian. You don't want to bring them the Quran, you want to bring them the Bible. And you've got Bibles that are printed in the Arab language, in Aramaic. Now, what's the first thing the Bible says? Look at Genesis. In the beginning, God created. Now you're going to read it and if you're in French, which I'm French, okay, it would be, I forget exactly the wording, but à la commencement, in the beginning, Dieu, le bon Dieu, or Dieu. Dieu is not God. But we obviously are talking about the same guy, right? Well, you pick up that Aramaic book of Genesis, and it says, whatever, however you pronounce it in their language, in the beginning, Allah. Allah is God. It's the same God. Now, the question is Allah Yahweh? Is God Yahweh? When Jesus spoke of the Father, was he speaking of Yahweh? Yahweh is a Babylonian Jewish figure, deity, minor god, a war god. The Old Testament is as full of stories and dedication of a pagan idol as any other holy writings from any other people in the world. I mean the parts of it that are about this guy Yahweh. So, let me see. Mythbusters don't. Okay. That's all this stuff is just my opinions, no authority here. But on this whole thing of Muslim, I've been watching this series lately. I love a good drama, and the Turkish people have put together a series that is really, I mean, they're beginning to get a little bit where the hero's girlfriend keeps showing up in places where, even in the freest of societies, they would be telling her, get your little booty home. And they didn't let her run around like that in Muslim societies. But, so they do stretch things a little bit for poetic license. But they are telling the story of all of the intrigue before the state of Israel was created. You had all this stuff going on before World War I, when Victoria was queen. And the oil was just beginning to be on the... Number one, they always knew they had oil, but they didn't know what it was good for until the railroads and then the cars. And with the invention of the gasoline-powered automobile. Now, all of a sudden, oil's important. And they start looking at the Mideast, which has a lot of oil. And so it goes through all the intrigues. But because it's a soap opera, you're looking at history through the Sultan's wife fighting and feuding with his sister who wants her husband to be raised up to the Sultan level. And they got their kids falling in love with the wrong people. And the Sultan's wife decides she's going to make her son marry somebody he doesn't want to marry. And an army general, they get these arranged marriages going on in the harem, and it's wonderful drama. I mean, tear jerking, seriously. If you want to, and it's family friendly because they are doing it according. That's the other thing. We got no more. I'm sorry, but I'm not going to defend Islamic society because they do a lot of real nasty stuff. But when they start calling us names and looking at us, how can anyone look at what we got going on and say they're not right? Seriously. Okay, I've got some things down. Oh, there we go. My screen keeps freezing. The oath is to the Constitution, not to the President. Yeah, that's true. There's something hiding. Are you speaking the gospel? I think there's a typo in there. Am I speaking about the gospel? Because anything I speak is just me talking. It's not gospel. Nobody speaks gospel except the ones who wrote it down almost 2,000 years ago. Well, I'm going to get going. Wow, this was fun. We had a lot of people. There's still got half a dozen people here after an hour. Got at least one new subscriber. Please share this around, and anyone else who's that soap opera thing I was talking about from Turkey. It's called Abdul Hamid, and it's all in the Turkish language, but they have English subtitles, so I'm able to read those while I watch. I would love to hear from other people watching that, because it's really, you get into the story, and like I say, it's like a soap opera. You find yourself crying with the mother whose daughter is trying to commit suicide because she doesn't want to marry the guy she's been told she has to marry, and this one, the son of the Sultan's general, keeps trying to volunteering for suicide missions because he's not being allowed to be with the woman he loves. So you got all this Romeo and Juliet stuff going on, as well as a lot of interesting stuff, because I can watch it, and when they start talking about the Sultan meeting with this guy Theodore Herzl, who was basically wrote the book that people picked up when they decided that the Zionists, he established the Zionist party, I guess. So he's a character in this story. So I have to go look and Google around and see, well, how much of this is actually part of history. And quite a bit of it is, except that I'm getting to look at it completely through Muslim eyes. And we don't get to do that when we stay within our own culture. We have to step outside and look back at ourselves, not through the propaganda. Like, I'm not talking about these disgusting, standing up there and telling us we have to sacrifice our children in favor of a bunch of immigrants sneaking over the border, and then trying to blame Mexico, or trying to say we hate Mexicans, when in fact a lot of those people coming over the border illegally are not Mexican. Mexico doesn't want them down there either. So, anyway. Yeah, I guess we're just kind of floundering around now, but I'll try to come on more often. We're getting some good people in, and we're getting more good chatters. I think we've pretty much banned the cluster of nasty trolls that were coming in. And, like I said, I don't mind if somebody wants to say a few remarks, but, yeah, the dirty stuff and the gutter stuff, we don't need that here. So, God bless some, have mercy on some, and to hell with the rest. Just ignore them. You get to pick the group you're in. Denise Matteau, over and out.